free to move your seats around to make it easier to see or hear. If you listen to a whole talk like that, you can get a little imbalanced. The worst thing. It's a beautiful Oregon summer. Hope you're getting a chance to get out to the water somewhere and enjoy this time of year. I'd like to speak this morning. I titled this talk Psychosomatic Zen, or Psychosomatic Zazen. And in a way, it's a response to one of the questions that was asked last week at the question and response session. And I'm not seeing, I can't remember his name, the fellow who asked the question. I'm not seeing him here right now, but he was asking about the limits of psychology, where a kind of psychologizing. Oh, was it you? Oh, great. What's your name? Isaac, great. So Isaac was asking about psychology and the way in which...
I'm really going to get an answer now.
Well, we'll see. You're going to get a response. We'll see if it's helpful for you or not. But in a way, is a response to your question about psychology and the limits of psychologizing what it is that we're doing in the Buddhist practice in general and in meditation in particular. And a couple weeks ago, during breakfast one morning, one of the residents, Kempo, told this funny story from a movie or a TV show called Mozart in the Jungle. Has anyone ever heard of this before? I had never heard of it, but Kempo had heard of it and watched it. Apparently, it's a series that was on, and there's this scene where one of the characters turns to the maestro. And they're talking about some kind of a curse. I went and watched just that snippet of it, and they're talking about some kind of a curse. And he says, "Oh, maestro, don't you think the curse could just be psychosomatic?" And the maestro looks at him, and he's like, "Of course it's psychosomatic." And he says, "Everything's psychosomatic." And we had a good laugh about that over breakfast a couple weeks ago, and it got me thinking about what it would mean to reclaim that word psychosomatic. What might be part of a process of thinking of psychosomatic not as a way to dismiss something, but as a way to affirm something, and a way to look more deeply into what is meditation, what is Buddhist practice in general, what is any kind of spiritual practice in general, what is life. And so I'd like to follow that, I don't know what it is, wormhole, something. This morning a little bit. Medical and scientific advances have uncovered a really miraculous world. Have you read any of these, some of the research they're doing now about mood and gut biology? This is really wild, right? How much of us is me in the way that I thought about it being me is being called into question in really fun ways. I think if you're a Buddhist, it's fun. Maybe for other people, it's more threatening. But those kinds of scientific discoveries are really amazing. The way that we've known for a long time about the psychological effect on the efficacy of treatment. So we would say that there's a placebo effect. But quite a while ago, they did some studies where they even told the people they were giving them a placebo. And it had exactly the same effect. It wasn't diminished at all. So they gave some people the medicine, they gave some people no medicine, they gave some people a placebo, and then they gave some people a placebo and said, "Oh, we're giving you the placebo." And through those processes, they saw that actually the people who knew they had the placebo also had this effect. So it brings up a lot of questions about what is the relationship between body and mind, psychosomatic, psycho, mind, heart, psyche, soul, spirit, somatic, body, material, form. How are these together? And just as scientific advances have uncovered a miraculous world, there's a miraculous world that's uncovered through a religious life, through a spiritual life, through a yogic life. And this psychosomatic practice, I think, is something that's really quite a treasure. And so I'd like to talk a little bit about that today, and probably a few talks after this. Now, when we learn to sit Zazen, we're directly studying this self of non-separation. Body and mind are not separate. And you can get that in just a very, very, very direct way. You sit down if you have meditation instruction, and Joichi's been teaching that these days. Where is Joichi? Oh, he's here. Okay, he's hiding behind Ogyoku. He'll say, oh, put your right foot this way, your left foot this way. If it's more comfortable to sit on a bench, sit like this, or you can sit in a chair. Here's some principles about the stability of your pelvis and what it means to be upright. And you go through this process of learning something about your body, and it seems like you're doing something with your body, and you are. Right? But your mind is also completely involved. The mudra which you are embodying by taking care of yourself, taking care of this materiality with an image of uprightness that has been handed down through stories and through pictures and through other people's practice, then you start working with that idea that you have of what it means to be upright, and this intermediary world appears, where it's not just about your body, it's not just about your mind, that those two things you can't really separate. Now, of course, that's true all the time. Right? But when we sit down for meditation, that's one of the ways in which we can explore the non-separation. We can look into it in a very direct way. And sometimes it looks like kind of, what is going on here? Like, why won't that? And sometimes it feels like a total wholeness, like a round, luminous moon, and everything in between. All of those are a study of that non-separation. We call it a study of the mudra of Zazen, or the mandala of awakening, where our individual enactment of something is not disconnected from all the other beings of the cosmos, if we want to get really grand about it. And our sitting, what mind, what heart, what consciousness is here, what body, what materiality is here, is part of, or is an instance of, this mudra, which is the whole. And in that practice, how the heart is, how the mind is, and how the world is, we can't really find a dividing line. And you can experience this very directly in sitting. If things get a little bit quiet, and then you hear, today's a little windy, so you hear this creaking that's been happening. These trees, they grow. Imagine that. And they touch the fence, and then we cut a little piece out of the fence, and then they grow some more, and then they touch the fence again. And we haven't cut the little piece out of the fence yet this year, so we're getting that kind of symphony. So just picking that out as an example of a sound. When you hear that sound, it's very hard to say where it is. Is it in your mind? Is it in your body? There's some vibration. You can feel it as your embodiment. I'm saying that, try to say that very precisely. You can feel it as your embodiment. There is something which vibrates as you, as that sound comes to you. The squeaking of the tree isn't quite as maybe like romantic as the call of a bird, or something, or the waterfall, sound of the waterfall. Actually, if you go sit Zazen close to a waterfall, it's definitely noisy. You have to do a different thing with that. If it's far off, it's kind of nice, or just a little waterfall from a stream, that's kind of romantic. But any of these things, you can study that really directly. And if you take up a consistent practice of meditation, I'm going to talk a lot about meditation today, but there's many aspects to this. If you take up that constant practice, a consistent practice of it, you start to feel that very directly. And so that's what I mean by studying directly, not studying through creating a conceptual map of it, but studying it through seeing how it is. And then there are ways that you shift, right? Your body shifts, your mind shifts, the world shifts. And you begin to know something in a different way about this dance of life. And even as we do that, there's a tendency to stay in a fundamental framework of materialism. That is the karma of our age. What I mean by a fundamental framework is that even if we have those kind of experiences, we're studying that directly, our tendency is when it comes to questioning something or trying to figure something out, we'll say, oh, well, there's like the real world, right? i.e. the material stuff, which is out there, of which I am an observer. And I can admit there's some of it in here. That's what's so interesting about all those microorganisms in your gut, right, that affect your mood. From one standpoint, it's like, of course they do. Why is that so shocking to us? Or why is that so kind of thrilling? Because there's this outside stuff, the really real stuff, that's outside stuff. And now it's doing this inside stuff. And that doesn't seem like that should be possible, right? It seems like, those little microorganisms should just have their own headaches, right? What would they be doing with me? And so I'm not saying that's universal, but I'm saying there's a tendency, and this is a really important thing for us to recognize, that meditation is powerful, powerful, powerful religious practice. And it also, for it to deepen and broaden, needs us to call our assumptions into question. So it's not only the consumption of experience that arises through a practice like meditation that's important, but it's what is the underpinnings of those experiences that we also have to work with. And teachings, Buddhist teachings, spiritual teachings in general, religious teachings, they're all pointing at that. They're pointing at that fundamental framework as well as the immediacy of experience. Now, there's an interesting argument among some scholars about the development path of Buddhism when the philosophers got involved. So one side are the more on the yogic side or the yogi side, and they say, oh, that's when the real Buddhism kind of died, because all of these Brahmins converted to Buddhism, and then they wanted to have these grand explanations, and they wanted to have ontological arguments, and they wanted to, think about how is it that we know things, and what are the frameworks, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So they say that's when we stopped doing what the Buddha did, which he was just a yogi, right? And he followed the experience of his yoga. So I think that's a really important criticism for us to hear. We can get off on one side and just think about things in a very philosophical way about what is our experience. But the other side is saying, well, no, wait a minute. All that stuff is really important. Like, you can't practice yoga without some framework. I mean, you always have a framework. So if we're not acknowledging the framework, if we're not working with the framework, then we're acting as if pure experience is what is guiding us. But experience is always colored by karma. It's always colored by some kind of causes and conditions. So we need to bring that into it. So this is one of the things I love about scholars who study this kind of thing, is they bring out an argument like that, and almost always I think, thank God for both sides. Actually we need both of those arguments to help us in our practice. Here I'm bringing up the side that says, how do we pay attention to our framework? If we don't, actually our experience will also tell us something. If we stay in that framework, a kind of fundamental framework that's basically materialistic, and we're practicing with some diligence, and we find that direct study of the non-separated quality of being, there is a measure of equanimity that arises. A measure of equanimity that then tends to turn stale. And there's a kind of plateau, and there's a kind of dulling effect. And meditation can become a dulling practice as opposed to an enlivening practice, because we're sort of snapping back into that, oh yeah, it's that chill place I know. Let me just go to the chill place. And we click into that chill place, also known as disassociative place, right? And we stay there, right? Which can be therapeutic, okay? It can be therapeutic, but it also has a dulling effect if it's indulged in an imbalanced way. And in that process, we continue this habit of reducing phenomena to material, right? Trying to understand phenomena from the side of their material quality. And some people do that with great vigor. I'd say we all do it to a certain degree. And underneath that, if you pay attention to it, I think most often what you'll find is a lot of fear about our bodies, and a lot of fear about our minds. And so if you can lock something in when you're afraid, that feels like the solution often. Let's get something locked in, right? And what I'm proposing here is, this is exactly the invitation that psychosomatic Zazen, psychosomatic practice, is inviting us into. An intermediary place in which locked down is not the way forward, right? Something else. How many people watched Contact? Jodie Foster, 1997. I think it was 1997. I know that because I watched it on Friday. We were talking about aliens at lunch, and then Genjo said, Contact. It sounds like it's time to watch Contact again. And I couldn't even quite remember the movie. I know I had watched it. I had those images of Jodie Foster with the earphones, like in my head, but I couldn't remember what it was about. So those of you who haven't seen it before, highly recommend it. Really good. It's like a story. It's a Hollywood movie, right? But it's a kind of exploration of faith and science and how do these intertwine, and it's got good drama, and it's got Jodie Foster, and so it's great. But there's this interesting thing that happens. Long story short, basically they're building this machine, sent some plans by aliens, at least they think, and they're building this machine, and she's going to travel in this machine to go through something and contact these aliens. And this interesting thing happens, and so while they're getting ready for it, they decide to put in this seat. Right? So they have this seat, and she has this metal. Graphically, it's very cool, like what's happening on a symbolic level. She has this breastplate that's made out of some kind of metal that has these two things on the back. They're going to lock her into this seat that's in the middle of this round pot. It seemed like a mistake. It's a perfectly round thing, and you're going to put this seat right in the middle that you're bolting to the floor. It just seemed like a mistake from the get-go. And she calls it into question. She's like, those aren't on the plans. Everything else we're doing is on the plans the aliens sent us, but that's not on the plans. Why are we doing that? And the security advisor is like, I'm not going to take any discussion from you here. You got to do it. A minimum level of security is necessary, even though they're going to put her in this machine they don't know what it's going to do. It's going to like catapult her across the cosmos, right? So he's insisting on these minimal things. And what happens is it starts to vibrate. There's this vibration that's happening, and they don't know where it's coming from, and she's the only one who can feel it. Right? Think about that imagery there for a second. She's the only one who can feel it. She's in the pod. It's perfectly circular. Right? And she's right there. She can feel the vibration. And she catapults across the cosmos, and I won't tell you the conclusion of the whole thing, but this chair becomes a really big problem. And she knows, she's known all along it's a big problem, that bolting it down isn't going to work. And so there's this point where she releases herself. Everything goes still. And eventually the chair gets ripped up and thrown against the side, and all this sort of stuff happens. But as I was thinking all about this, I was watching this movie. That's really how it is. I mean, that place that you're going to bolt down, this is a place that I'm quite sure is the place that's going to keep me safe. I have a lot of fear in my body and my mind. Here's a place that's secure. I'm going to hold on to it. So a lot of that reductionist type thinking, it can go in both directions. Right? It can go into materialism, or it can go into spiritual or psychological, but there's a tendency to concretize it. And in a way, the concretizing is always material, even if it's an idea. Right? Material doesn't have to be material in this way. It's like a form which has a stasis. So the fear behind that tends to drive it. I bring that up because I think we should be really kind with ourselves. It's not like, oh, I'm bolting this thing down. What the heck's wrong with me? I need to rip it up. It is like, no, feel the vibration of what is there in the places where you have something that you feel like you need to keep held down. Right? Feel the vibration. That's important to practice. Right? And it's important to give it a context in which non-separation is being actualized. So Zazen is a place where we actualize, where we practice that non-separation. Again, it's happening all the time. And right there in Zazen, we're tuning ourselves with it. We're harmonizing with it. and some healing can really come out there. Now, there's another possibility to this habit. There's an intermediate world that opens up as we take seriously, or I could say we inquire more deeply into the undividability of spirit and matter. As we look more deeply into that well that really has no bottom, there is another kind of world that opens up, which is not an explanatory world. It's not a world in which we get to know how things are. It's a world of art, it's a world of poetry, it's a world of story, of music, of myth. That's why the Mozart in the Jungle thing really hit me, right? He's the maestro, right? He's the great composer. He knows this. This intermediary world of heart, we could call it. This word mind, in Buddhism, we translate the word, there's a Chinese character which is used for several different Sanskrit words, but then when we translate into English, it all gets kind of messy. Do we use the word mind? Do we use the word heart? When you say mind, it seems kind of like cold and calculating. When you use the word heart, people think it's like sentiment and like that's what they think when you say heart. And so I tend to like flip back and forth between mind and heart. The character in Chinese is pronounced in Japanese shin or kokoro, and it unifies a pretty broad terminology. But I want to emphasize here that what I'm talking about is not heart just in a sentimental way, because that's the way we tend to think about it. It's that most intimate of intimates. It's right there in the very root of consciousness, which is what we're studying. That's what we're actualizing in meditation. That heart is the place of this deep flowing. A deep flowing from that well that has no bottom. And it doesn't have a bottom because we can't say, oh, here's mind, here's material, that's where they meet. Actually, mind and material all the way through. So I bring this up and speak in this way because I think it's important to try to get underneath some of our calcified ideas about mind or material. But what is this taking seriously or this inquiring deeply in terms of, so what do I do with that? Well, again, if we speak in terms of meditation, oftentimes when we're studying through meditation, we're concerned with awareness, we're concerned with concentration, we're concerned with how am I paying attention. And there's different ways to pay attention. One way we can pay attention is we say, oh, here's a glass. Grab it. You can all do that. Even if you can't see the glass right now, you can grab the glass. Hear it, right? Mind grabs it. It's a phenomenon. So one way of practicing concentration is it can just be a series of those things. One moment after the next, a phenomena is recognized. Glass, grab it. Kotsu, grab it. Clock, grab it. Ash, grab it. Grab it, grab it, grab it, grab it, grab it, grab it, grab it. And that type of practice can lead to a certain kind of concentration. We can learn to hold our mind on something. But there's another way to practice concentration, or there's another side to a concentration practice or to an awareness practice, which is rooted in this indivisibility of the awareness and the object of the awareness. You see how the first way is like there's awareness and there's the object of the awareness. That's where the emphasis is placed. So I'm sitting and I'm like, oh, I'm really paying attention to my body, right? Checking in, doing the scan. This is here, this is here, this is here, this is here. Yep, check it off, check it off, check it off, check it off. Right? There's another possibility in which each of those phenomena is not an answer, is not an object of our awareness, but is a question. This is one of the most ancient ways that Zen has brought us into this deep inquiry. People ask, who am I? My teacher's emphasis was on what. It's not even like directing it towards who am I, but just what. Glass. What? It doesn't mean there is no phenomena of glass that is encountered. It is what? And the edge of the glass is no longer leading out into just empty space. And all we're paying attention to is the glass and discarding all of the empty space. But to say glass means to speak of the whole, to speak of everything that is not glass. That kind of awareness is different. It has a different quality. So if we're going to inquire into this non-separation, first we need to bring about a certain level of equanimity. We have a lot of physical and mental noise, just stuff that's kind of doing this. And so we spend some time when you sit down to calm down. And the more regularly you take some time to sit quietly, the more easily a certain kind of equanimity can emerge. And that equanimity is precious. At that place where you're recognizing some accessibility to that equanimity, then to explore the non-separation, that's where you can ask the question, what? What is the phenomena that's arising? Okay? And arise here just means like you see it, you hear it, you taste it, you think it, you touch it. Right? Anything that arises as a thing. And ask the question, what? What is it? Like, that's the root of awareness. Not, oh, I noticed it was made of glass, now I've got a list of all the properties. That's not the awareness we're talking about. We're talking about the very direct awareness of what? Like when you see something you don't know or something you can't hold on to, if you're walking in the mountains or the woods and you come up to a vista, and vistas are so amazing because you just can't get it. Right? There's very beautiful things. Like maybe you see a very beautiful little flower. Zazen and my wife were up by the river yesterday, and there are these little orchids that grow in the stream. You know what they're called? Stream orchids. But they're really pretty. We hadn't seen them before, and just right now they're blooming on the upper Willamette River. So that's great, right? But there's this way where you kind of think, oh, okay, I saw a stream orchid. But a vista is sort of like, you just know you can't. But you also know you're part of it. Now, you can look at the flower in the same way. Actually, the experience of the flower can be exactly the same as that. This is what I'm talking about the practice of what? This ungraspable body. It's our own ungraspable body, but it's also the ungraspable body of all phenomena. Now, actually, this is all there is all the time. To be able to see, to be able to feel, to be able to touch, to be able to taste. At the root of all those experiences is this total non-separation. The point here in practice, maybe we could say, is appreciation. What is the quality of my appreciation of that happening? A little heavy into visual media today. How many people have seen the film Rhapsody in August? Has anyone seen that? It's an old Japanese one, I think. Japanese. Rhapsody in August.
Wow.
Really wonderful. It's about a family in Nagasaki, and the grandmother had survived the nuclear bombing, and her grandkids are visiting from America. They're Japanese. They're visiting from America, and there's this whole wonderful story that unfolds. I highly recommend that movie as well.
It has like ants or something.
Yeah, so that's what I'm going to talk about. So there's there's this scene in that movie, and if you'd seen it, this would be more meaningful, but you can go watch it later. There's one scene where they're walking out in the countryside, and there's a small temple there, which is very common in Japan. There's so many temples. My Japanese priest friends are always saying, there's more temples than there are convenience stores. And from an American perspective, you're kind of like, well, okay, like, why does that mean something? But there are so many convenience stores in Japan. There's so many convenience stores. Like every, 5 blocks or something, if you're in a town, they're just everywhere. So Japan's just full of temples. Most of them, no one lives there. They're more like a shrine that's in a field somewhere, but many of them may have a priest that lives there of some kind. But they're just everywhere. So in this scene, they're walking through the rice fields, and there's this small temple, which would be the temple of the village that's farming in that area. And it's filled with the villagers, and they're all chanting the Heart Sutra, which we chant in English on Sunday mornings, but sometimes chant it in Sino-Japanese. So they're there chanting Kanji, Zaibo, Sagyojin, Hanya, Hara, Mitaji, and they're boom, 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 just like we do every Sunday morning. And the director of this movie, I think, is so brilliant. He really gets something about these sutras. And so while they're chanting, the camera pans in, or what do you say, like zeroes in on these ants that are climbing this flower. And there's a certain kind of flower, I can't remember the name of it, where the presence of the ants makes it open, or the opening of the flower causes the ants to come. It's sort of this symbiotic relationship. Does anyone know the name of the flower? Peony. Oh, it's the peonies. Yeah, so there's peonies. And the ants are climbing the peonies, and it's opening. And it's just remembering that scene from that movie just brings chills to my being. There's this language, right, that has been cared for millennia, which is just running through. It's running through. Here, this totally symbiotic relationship between the ant and the peony, the opening of the flower, and the ant that's coming there for nourishment. It's a really powerful image. Many of our brothers and sisters in the Abrahamic world, the mystics of the book, you might call them, they would say that you can't see the Word of God. You see what's manifest of the Word of God. And a person of faith's job is to see the glory of that manifestation, to be able to read the book of God as the world. That is what it means to be faithful. If we shift that over to a Buddhist perspective a little bit, think about those ants going up the peony. Think about the sutra that's being read. Think about the sutra that runs through everything all the time. The sutra of the undivided mind. This intermediary place is where all creativity springs from, where awareness springs from. And while in our faith we don't emphasize the creator, right? We do emphasize that there is the continual creation which is moving through this heart. And that's what it is that we're being aware of. To talk about awareness isn't to put the object out there and say, I'm just being aware of the object. To see an object is to receive this heart, which is the heart of the cosmos. It's significant in that way. I'm using the word significant rather than meaning, because meaning would tend to want to construct some a meaning as a network of connection. What I'm saying here is it's significant just as itself, whatever the phenomena that I am aware of. In Buddhism, we would say it is thus. Or as our Chinese ancestors would say, it. They just say it. it is a crazy ambiguous word, right? And that's why they use it. It seems like something really simply we could just point to and say, oh, it is da 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 da. It. What? What is the it? So I'd invite you, this is just some kind of trying to kick up the crust a little bit in considering what it is that you're engaged in a meditation practice. And in the broader practices that we engage at this temple and other places. Challenge your fundamental structure, right? By asking really bravely and precisely meaning don't just take the answer that comes. Like you say, what is this? Oh, it's a glass. Okay, no, what? And just keep listening and keep asking the question. Are there any questions or comments? If you're online, you can just unmute yourself and then ask a question. If you're in the hall, just you can gasho and because if you're in the yard, we have to point a microphone at you, so you need to come to the ingawa or the porch here.
We talked about religion. I looked it up one time. It's in the Latin, which means religere, to tie back. And so Buddhism seems to me to get free. And so it's closer to a psychology than it is to a religion in that respect. And that's what I think, that's,
I know that's what you think.
And because I don't like religion, I was brought up Irish Catholic, and the nuns finished me off.
The only thing I would say is that is fine. We can call it psychology, we can call it religion, but no matter what we call it, it's dangerous.
Yeah.
I mean, it's dangerous to call it something, but it's also it itself is just dangerous. And so, just as long as we don't forget that, so many people have been kind of pushed around or beat up by religion, and many religious things have been very harmful. And so, oftentimes we say, well, I don't want to call it religion, I want to call it something else because of those harmful aspects, as if there weren't going to be harmful aspects in the thing that I'm calling it now, like psychology. So psychology is wonderfully dangerous. And the flow of how we conceive of who we are, I would say right now, the kind of very plain talking behaviorist way of psychologizing things can be very reductionist and really soul crushing. And I'm not saying that's what everybody who's involved in psychology is doing. I would say there's a stream of psychology that's like that, that I think is abusive. But so we can't just say psychology and then be like, oh, we don't have to deal with the danger that's in religion, because it's that danger. If we're going to be in this deep encounter, we're gonna find it wherever we go. So you call it psychology, I'll call it religion, and we'll find a way to take care of the awareness of the danger.
Hey, Joe.
Hi.
I can't not speak to this, of course, sorry. So, my own experience with this, really directly, is that it's not the same. Psychology and Buddhism it's not that there's no relationship. But however, what I would say about that is that early, particularly Yogacara, consciousness-only school, was talking about the nature of the mind, and it took Western science about 2,500 years to be able to talk about the unconscious and to make that concept clear and that description clear. Buddhism had already talked about this in different language, and there was no label like psychology. So it's not that that's completely different, but it's also not completely the same. And as I understand it, the study of consciousness was a religious endeavor.
Yeah.
And so it's not that there's no complementarity,
Yeah.
it's just that they're not, they come from two different, anyway, I don't want to go on about it, but it's very useful. I also would say that people have been beaten up and abused by different forms of psychology and how it's been used and applied and how people have been labeled.
Yeah.
And so that's a long discussion, but not appropriate for here. Thank you.
Thank you.
Chair, good morning. I had a question. I was very happy with your talk today. I wanted to ask you similar questions, and I'm interested in the concept of heart and mind and the intertwinedness of it. And what do you think was going on in the Eastern construction that it didn't get sort of separated out as two things, like we have this dualistic sort of Cartesian separation in the Western tradition? So I guess one question is how you can speak to like that why we shouldn't be surprised to find that they didn't separate it out like our society did. And then the other thing is, what do we do with the fact that when we say heart and mind, we use the term mind to reference like an organ that's responsible for consciousness. But the problem for me with the term heart is that it's a metaphor. When we use the term heart, we're not talking about the organ that's a blood pump. We're trying to talk about something that is associated with emotional phenomena. And so I think that also gets really messy because we're trying to like talk about something and call it the heart, but we're totally wrong in terms of what we mean literally by the heart, and how do we sort of connect all those things, and what's going on, and why are we comfortable with using the term heart when it sort of is such a huge problem?
I think of many problems. On the first one, there are many, within Buddhism, there's many different styles of teaching, different ways of understanding of. Some have more dualistic quality, and material and spirit are quite separated out. So that also exists within the Buddhist tradition and Asian traditions in general. I'm not aware of anything that took hold in quite the same way as it did in Western philosophical tradition, which also I think was probably tied to our technological advancement in some ways. So I'm not sure, why. But I think that we're at a place now where we can see that there's something suspicious about the assumption that they're separate, and sometimes we gain something from separating them. We can do some important work through the separation, but that if we just fundamentally believe they're separate, that it creates a lot of havoc. The other question about heart, when I use the word heart, again, it's kind of metaphor. But I tend to be saying it as the intimate of intimates. Like if we said the heartwood of a tree, you said the heart of a artichoke, so there, which comes, I think the origin must be the same, from this kind of metaphor of the organ that pumps the blood. But why is that word used? I think there's a somatic quality to it. There is something in our being which is located in this area, which is highly charged, and it has to do with thought, it has to do with emotion, and so I think it's no mistake that this area has been referenced in that way by so many traditions. In fact, to the extent if you just take your hand and place it on your chest, I mean, just keep it there for a while. It's pretty wild. So I think there is something to that, whether it's the or not. Another thing I think about in relationship is, what does it pump? Blood. And what is blood? Blood is like the material aspect of spirit. It's like fire as a liquid. It's like this the intimate place of embodiment is sort of in there in that blood. Why is so much Christ imagery blood imagery? Why is in Christ is God incarnate, the word as body, you know, those places. I don't have an explanation that ties it all together, but those are kind of pointings of why I think the word heart has that kind of quality. But always, for me, I always feel like, because I'm a very emotional person, I always feel like, maybe I should use maybe, because then I feel like maybe I'm just communicating some kind of deep passion feeling, which is really, I mean, that comes through me really easily. So yeah. I'm glad for that. I don't want to dismiss it, but it's also a big sidetrack.
Ejo,
Hi.
I accept the all-pervasiveness of the what quality. And in fact, I have observed in myself that I tend to bask in it when it's a vista or an ant on a peony or a stream lily. But I am, it's not that I don't accept that it appears, it's that I don't want it to appear when it comes in the form of violence, or in the form of pandemic, or in the form of death of a loved one. You know, that's kind of what's there, but I don't want it. I can't accept it sometimes. How do we practice with that less bucolic what?
Yeah, so it's in that place, this is directly related to emotion. Our aversion for difficult emotion is almost always what's pushing us away, in my experience. So we should work to make the world a better place, a safer place, kinder place. And we will come across loss, death, violence. And so in what way do we encounter them? Or in what way do we practice this inquiry of non-separation with them? It means we have to develop that capacity of heart to feel deeply. Without it, then I've seen it again and again. People who are quite accomplished meditators who have a very good mental hygiene. But when it comes to encountering the emotionality of difficulty, just turn, because our emotional capacity hasn't been developed. So I don't mean to encourage you to want to encounter those things, but to realize that they are part of a human life. And so as part of a human life, how do we make the effort to not dodge them? And in that not dodging, something becomes possible. In this way, if my devious mind wants to stretch out the heart thing a little bit more and use the word love, it's also a dangerous word, all kinds of problems. Right? But it is a love which allows us to go right to the edge with those most difficult things. And in Buddhism, we call that compassion, to feel together. Right? A passion where the movement, the passion that is moving through my being is not a movement that is separate from the outside. And it's not just a feeling as opposed to the material. That the undividedness is present there in the passion, the vibration, the fire, the blood of everything. That may be a little bit too poetic, but just end today by mentioning the name of my good friend Taihaku Nichiren Daihosho, who passed away just 49 days ago. And I talked about her and after she passed away a few weeks ago. And 49 days within Buddhism is the very important period after someone's passing, 7 cycles of 7 in their transition. And so today we won't be reading her name into the morning services starting tomorrow. And I feel sad about that. There's something about that when you know, letting someone go is hard. And actually, I don't encourage people to let someone go as if they're going to disappear. It's more like can I allow my hand to stay open so that our connection can stay alive? Because there's a part of me that just wants to hold, and when I can't, then I just want to jerk back, and then my tension's gone. So in loss, we have a great teacher about that threshold. And right when someone passes away, it's almost impossible to do. I would say, maybe very highly realized masters can do that right away. I'm not one of those. I need the 49 days. And then at the 49 days, I'm standing there at that threshold and feeling like actually I just want to yank her back. But it's that place to keep something open. And that's why we keep honoring people. We don't necessarily chant their name every day, but we keep making offerings. We keep remembering them. We keep them alive in our Sangha. And though only a couple of you ever met Taihaku before, maybe no one, her vibrancy of practice is deeply influential to Buddha Ai. And her Dharma heir Kenzan is our deep Dharma friend and comrade. So please look forward to meeting him. And if you're ever in Vermont, I highly recommend for you to go to the temple there. Shaoshan is the name of the temple.